In the early hours of March 18, 2026, the skies above Tel Aviv lit up with the unmistakable glow of incoming ballistic missiles. Sirens screamed across central Israel as residents scrambled for shelter. This was no ordinary barrage. Among the warheads were multiple warhead cluster munitions designed to overwhelm even the most advanced air defenses. And this time, they succeeded in reaching their mark. An elderly couple in their 70s, Yaron and Ilana Moshe, were killed in their own apartment in the Tel Aviv suburb of Ramat Gan. Shrapnel tore through a train station platform in central Tel Aviv, suspending rail services nationwide. This is the latest escalation in a war that began less than 3 weeks ago with the assassination of Iran's supreme leader. For American and British audiences watching from afar, the implications are immediate. A key ally under direct fire, oil markets already spiking, and the very real risk that this conflict draws in wider Western involvement. Tonight, we break down exactly what happened overnight, why Iran chose cluster munitions, how this fits into the broader 2026 Iran war, and what it means for the days ahead. This is a developing story grounded entirely in verified reporting from Israeli emergency services, Magen David Adom, and cross-checked by major international outlets. We present the facts from all sides without speculation. Let's start at the beginning of this chapter of the conflict, because context is everything. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. In a coordinated series of precision airstrikes across Iran, they struck high-value targets, including leadership compounds in Tehran. The operation resulted in the death of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, confirmed by both Iranian state media and Western intelligence. That single strike decapitated the Islamic Republic's command structure and triggered an immediate Iranian retaliation across the region. Missiles and drones aimed at Israel, American bases in the Gulf, and shipping lanes near the Strait of Hormuz. Within days, the fighting expanded. Hezbollah escalated from Lebanon. Israel pushed ground operations into southern Lebanon, and Iran began a sustained campaign of ballistic missile launches against Israeli cities. By early March, the pattern was clear. Iran was using its missile arsenal to force Israel onto the defensive, while its own territory absorbed daily American and Israeli airstrike. On March 9th came the first confirmed civilian deaths inside Israel from cluster munitions in the town of Yehud. Then, on March 17th, Israeli forces carried out 2 more high-profile assassinations inside Iran. Ali Larijani, the de facto head of the Supreme National Security Council, and Gholamreza Soleimani, commander of the Basij paramilitary force. Iran's response was swift and public. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced it would retaliate directly, and that retaliation arrived overnight on the 17th into the 18th. 4 separate salvos of ballistic missiles were detected leaving Iranian territory. Israeli air defense, the layered system of Iron Dome for short-range threat, David's Sling for medium range, and Arrow 3 for high-altitude ballistic missile, engaged aggressively. Most incoming projectiles were intercepted, but not all. At least 1 missile released its cluster submunitions in mid-air, scattering smaller explosives over a populated area. One of those submunitions struck an apartment building in Ramat Gan, east of Tel Aviv. The impact killed Yaron and Ilana Moshe instantly. The couple, both around 70 years old, were reportedly heading toward their reinforced safe room when the munition hit. A walker was later found near their body, underscoring how little time they had. Israeli emergency services from Magen David Adom confirmed the deaths within hours. No other fatalities were reported in that specific strike, though several people suffered light shrapnel injuries and dozens more were treated for shock and anxiety. Simultaneously, shrapnel from another missile or its debris damaged the Salvador Central train station in Tel Aviv. Platforms were hit, windows shattered, and rail services across the country were suspended as a precaution. Additional impacts were reported in nearby Holon and Rishon LeZion, where cars caught fire and residential streets showed cratering. Importantly, there were no widespread power blackouts as some early unverified social media posts suggested. The damage remained structural and transport-focused. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps released a statement claiming the barrage targeted Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Beersheba in direct revenge for the killings of Larijani and Soleimani. They described the use of Khorramshahr 4 and Qadr missile, equipped with multiple warhead technology. Independent verification has confirmed strikes in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area and the cluster munition impact in Ramat Gan. However, there is no independent confirmation of direct hits in Haifa or Beersheba at this time. Those specific claims remain Iranian state assertions. Now let's examine the weapons themselves, because this is where the military significance becomes clear. Traditional ballistic missiles carry a single large warhead. Cluster munitions, by contrast, release dozens or even hundreds of smaller submunitions that spread out like a shotgun blast across a wide area. This design is intended to saturate air defense radars and increase the statistical chance of at least some ordnance reaching the ground. In military terminology, it is a classic area saturation tactic. The trade-off is well known: greater risk of indiscriminate harm to civilians and civilian infrastructure. Under international law, cluster munitions are highly controversial precisely for this reason. Israel has stated that the specific warhead used in Ramat Gan was a cluster type, and Magen David Adom released images of the distinctive small craters and submunition debris consistent with that description. Israeli defenses performed well overall. The fact that 4 separate salvos were launched, yet only limited damage occurred, speaks to the effectiveness of the multi-layered Arrow and Iron Dome system, which have been upgraded repeatedly with American technical assistance. But the very use of cluster submunition shows Iran adapting its tactics to try to overwhelm those systems. Think of it as throwing multiple smaller threats at once so that the defense cannot lock onto every single one. This is the same logic Russia has employed with drone swarms in Ukraine, and Iran has clearly studied those lessons. The human cost, however, cannot be measured in technical specifications alone. 2 civilians in their 70s lost their lives in their own home. President Herzog visited the site. Defense Minister Israel Katz vowed that Israel would respond with further surprises. On the Iranian side, the IRGC framed the attack as justice for assassinated leader. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated that Iran's political system remains intact despite the leadership loss. Both sides are projecting strength, yet the reality on the ground shows civilians paying the price on both ends of the missile trajectory. Let's zoom out to the broader strategic picture, because this overnight barrage does not exist in isolation. The 2026 Iran war is now entering its 3rd week. The United States and Israel continue daily strikes on Iranian missile production sites, air defenses, and energy infrastructure, including the massive South Pars gas field. In response, Iran has kept the Strait of Hormuz under pressure, effectively disrupting 1/5 of global oil trade. European allies have so far declined requests to send naval forces to reopen the waterway, leaving the United States and Britain to weigh the costs of deeper involvement. For viewers in the UK and America, this matters directly. Rising fuel prices at the pump, potential supply chain shock, and the question of whether NATO partners will be asked to contribute more than rhetorical support. Think tanks monitoring the conflict, including the Institute for the Study of War, have noted Iran's repeated reliance on cluster war precisely because its conventional missile inventory is being steadily degraded by American and Israeli bunker-buster munitions. Each Iranian launch uses up irreplaceable assets, while Israel and the United States continue to attrit Iran's launch infrastructure from the air. This creates a slow-motion, grinding war of missile exchanges that both sides believe they can sustain longer than the other. Historically, this moment echoes several precedents that help us understand the scale. In 1991, during the Gulf War, Iraq fired Scud missiles at Israel in an attempt to draw it into the conflict and fracture the American-led coalition. Saturation tactics created widespread fear, even when actual casualties were relatively low. In 2024, Iran launched its first direct, large-scale missile and drone attack on Israel. Almost everything was intercepted, and the political message mattered more than the physical damage. What we are seeing now in 2026 is different. Confirmed civilian deaths inside Israel from Iranian strike, combined with the decapitation of Iran's own leadership, have removed the guardrails that previously kept these exchanges symbolic. We have moved from proxy shadowboxing to direct state-on-state ballistic warfare. The Institute for the Study of War and other specialist analysts also point to a dangerous new trend: the normalization of cluster munitions in urban areas. Once one side introduces them, the temptation for the other to respond in kind grows. And while neither Israel nor the United States has used cluster munitions in this theater, the precedent is now set. So where does this leave us on the morning of March 18th? The war is ongoing and accelerating. Israel has already confirmed the killing of yet another senior Iranian official, Intelligence Minister Esmail Khatib, in a follow-up strike. Additional Iranian missile waves have been detected, though most were intercepted. Searches continue at impact sites in central Israel. The next ISW situation report is expected this evening, and Magen David Adom updates will provide the latest casualty and damage assessment. For the United States and the United Kingdom, the stakes are rising daily. An ally is absorbing civilian casualties. Global energy markets are reacting, and the risk of miscalculation that pulls Western forces into direct combat grows with every exchange. Iran insists its political system remains resilient. Israel insists its defenses and offensive capabilities are superior. The truth, as always in war, will be written in the coming weeks by the balance of attrition, diplomacy, and sheer endurance. This remains a fast-moving story. Casualty figures come directly from Israeli authority and are subject to update. Cluster munitions carry well-documented legal and humanitarian concerns under international convention. We will continue to track every verified development. The next 72 hours could determine whether this missile exchange leads to a broader ground campaign or forces both sides back toward reluctant de-escalation. The world is watching closely. What do you think happens next? Leave your analysis in the comments below. If you want more in-depth coverage of this conflict or any other military flashpoint, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. So where does this leave us on the morning of March 18th? The war is ongoing and accelerating. Israel has already confirmed the killing of yet another senior Iranian official, Intelligence Minister Esmail Khatib, in a follow-up strike. Additional Iranian missile waves have been detected, though most were intercepted. Searches continue at impact sites in central Israel. The next ISW situation report is expected this evening, and Magen David Adom updates will provide the latest casualty and damage assessment. But the overnight barrage in Ramat Gan is more than just another exchange of fire. It's a stark indicator of how both sides are adapting in a grinding war of attrition. Iran has now launched hundreds of ballistic missiles since February 28th, with assessments indicating that roughly half have been fitted with cluster warheads. These are not random choices. Cluster munitions allow a single missile to cover a much wider footprint, forcing Israeli defenses to engage dozens of smaller threats simultaneously. The result? Even with interception rates in the high 80s or 90s for most salvos, a few submunitions get through, and when they do, the consequences are immediate and tragic in densely populated areas like Greater Tel Aviv. Israel, for its part, continues a methodical campaign of degradation. Daily airstrikes target Iranian missile production facilities, storage depots, launch sites, and command nodes. The IRGC Navy headquarters in Tehran was hit just days ago, along with energy infrastructure like parts of the South Pars gas field. Each strike chips away at Iran's ability to sustain large-scale barrages over time. The Institute for the Study of War has repeatedly highlighted this dynamic. Iran's missile inventory, while large, is finite and increasingly difficult to replenish under constant bombardment. Bunker busters and precision munitions from the US and Israel are designed exactly for this purpose, neutralizing hardened underground sites that conventional weapons cannot reach. Yet attrition cuts both ways. Every Iranian launch consumes irreplaceable assets, but every Israeli or American sortie exposes aircraft to Iran's remaining air defenses and risks escalation if a pilot is downed or a strike hits unintended targets. The war has already spread beyond bilateral exchanges. In southern Lebanon, Israeli ground forces are engaged in operations against Hezbollah positions, with fresh reports of tank fire wounding UN observers. Hezbollah has responded with rocket salvos into northern Israel, injuring dozens in recent days. This multi-front pressure stretches Israeli resources while giving Iran strategic depth through its proxies. For viewers in the United States and United Kingdom, the economic dimension is impossible to ignore. The Strait of Hormuz remains a flashpoint. Iran has threatened and partially demonstrated its ability to disrupt commercial shipping. More than 20 maritime incidents have been reported in and around the strait since early March. The U.S. has deployed additional naval assets, including bunker-buster-capable aircraft, to deter a full closure. European allies, including the UK, have so far resisted calls to contribute warships, citing the risk of entanglement in what Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has publicly called America's war. Oil prices are already reacting, spikes that feed directly into higher fuel costs at pumps in London, New York, and beyond. Supply chain disruptions could follow if tanker traffic slows further. This is no longer a distant regional conflict. It's one with tangible pocketbook implications for Western households. International reactions reflect the high stake. The United Nations has called for restraint, but no binding resolution has emerged amid Security Council division. Gulf states like Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, and Saudi Arabia have intercepted incoming Iranian missiles and drones in recent barrages, quietly aligning with the anti-Iran coalition while avoiding public escalation. President Herzog's visit to the Ramat Gan site, flanked by emergency responders, sent a clear domestic message of resilience. Defense Minister Katz's promise of surprises hints at further targeted operations inside Iran. On the Iranian side, the regime projects continuity, despite the leadership losses. Foreign Minister Araghchi insists the political system endured, even as state media mourns figures like Ali Larijani. This pattern of tit-for-tat decapitation strikes and retaliatory barrages echoes historical precedents in unsettling ways. The 1991 Scud attacks during the Gulf War created widespread civilian fear in Israel, but failed to fracture the coalition. Iran's direct attacks in 2024 were largely symbolic, intercepted almost entirely. What sets 2026 apart is the confirmed civilian fatality from cluster munitions inside Israel, combined with the unprecedented targeting of supreme leadership on both sides. We have crossed from proxy confrontation into a direct, high-intensity, state-on-state conflict with ballistic weapons at its core. The normalization of cluster munitions in urban areas raises serious humanitarian questions. International conventions restrict their use precisely because of the indiscriminate risk to civilians long after hostilities end, as unexploded bomblets linger like landmines. Looking ahead, several paths emerge. In the most optimistic scenario, sustained pressure on Iran's missile and command infrastructure could force a de facto pause in large-scale barrages, creating space for back-channel diplomacy, perhaps mediated by regional powers or even indirect US-Iran talk. More realistically, the current trajectory suggests continued exchanges, Iran launching periodic salvos to demonstrate resolve, Israel and the US responding with precision strikes to erode capability. The danger lies in miscalculation, a strike that kills too many civilians, a proxy attack that spirals, or an incident in the Strait of Hormuz that draws in naval forces directly. The next 72 hours remain critical. Will Iran attempt another major barrage to regain momentum after losing yet another intelligence chief? Will Israel escalate ground operations in Lebanon or intensify strikes on remaining Iranian nuclear-related sites? And crucially, how will the United States balance support for its ally with the domestic and global costs of deeper involvement? This remains a fast-moving story. Casualty figures come directly from Israeli authorities and are subject to update. Cluster munitions carry well-documented legal and humanitarian concerns under international convention. We will continue to track every verified development from sources like the Institute for the Study of War, Magen David Adom, and major international outlets. The next 72 hours could determine whether this missile exchange leads to a broader ground campaign, forces both sides back toward reluctant de-escalation, or spirals into something even more unpredictable. The world, and especially audiences in the USA and UK, is watching closely as oil prices climb and headlines warn of wider risk. What do you think happens next? Does attrition favor the side with superior air power and allies, or will Iran's asymmetric tools and proxies prove more resilient? Drop your analysis in the comments below. We read and feature thoughtful takes in community posts. If you're following the 2026 Iran war closely and want breakdowns of every major development without hype or bias, hit subscribe and turn on notifications for Redline USA. More updates coming as this story unfolds.